So today I'll be covering Section 230. Now, Section 230 isn't a hard topic, but has a lot of misunderstanding on it for some reason. Section 230 has three important functions: C1, C2A, and then C2B. Section 230, C1, treatment of publisher or speaker. No provider or user of interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information content provided by another information content provider. What C1 does is that any publication made by a third party, the service that hosts that publication cannot be held liable for it as a publisher. Soon after the creation of 230, the language of C1 had been broadened by the case of Xuron versus AOL in 1997. In this case, Xuron had tried to make a distinction between a publisher and a distributor and hold AOL liable not as a publisher, but as a distributor of the illegal material, as to get around the protections of C1. Firstly, the court concluded that distributors themselves were to be considered publishers, there protecting them under C1, and that 230 precludes courts from entertaining claims that would place a computer service provider in a publisher's role. Thus, lawsuits seeking to hold a service provider liable for its exercise of a publisher's traditional editorial functions, such as deciding whether to publish, withdraw, postpone, or alter content, are barred. While C1 is considered by many legal experts to be the powerhouse of 230, to the public, however, C2A steals the spotlight with its flashy language. C2A. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be held liable on account of any action voluntarily taken in good faith to restrict access or to availability of material that the provider or user considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable, whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. I've seen the public has taken issue with two sections within this paragraph, and that is otherwise objectionable and good faith, with there being a want for the courts to clarify their meanings. The one flaw that I see with this issue is that they miss the section of that the provider or user considers to be. This is subjective language, and what is objectionable is ultimately decided by the user or the service. Then finally, we have C2B. Any action taken to enable or make available to information content providers or other technical means to restrict access to material described in paragraph 1, C2A. What this plainly does, it just says, hey, I'm an interactive service. I'm going to give my users the ability to restrict content, and since I'm giving that ability to restrict them the ability to restrict content, I can be held liable for their actions of restricting content, or for the fact that I'm giving them the ability to restrict content. Now we're going to look at some right-wing conservative channels. Typically, I found that these kind of viewpoints hold the most misunderstanding when it comes to this law.
Protected by Section 230. And what they need to do is define in Section 230 what they mean by online platforms.
Platform definition? You can't define platform if the word platform doesn't exist in the law. 230 doesn't contain the word platform in it.
Because
this form of understanding where they'll quote 230 and then they'll quote words from 230, but then not actually read anything is a common thing when it comes to 230 because no one actually wants to read the law.
Number of complainants. And the 230 law is really clear. If you are not claiming the fact that you're a publisher, you're just simply reprinting stuff, you can't be sued. But if you're censoring, if you're adding content, that changes the game. And that's the 230 law. And
first of all, you don't need to claim that you're a platform and you're just republishing other people's content, that you're not a publisher. No requirement for that in 230. Second of all, if you add content that's your content, you're held liable for that because that's not a third-party content. That's the whole shindig. And if you censor content, you're still not liable for the content you censor or liable for other people's content just because you censor content. That's not what 230 is about if you've actually read it. Lastly, I've been hearing the comparison between a newspaper and an online service and asking why they don't have the same legal culpability, as they believe that since both curate, they both should share the same culpability for the illegal material. I, however, believe that this is a false equivalence, as both have different relations to the content, with one that deals with the majority of content published by third parties, and the other dealing with content they themselves helped create. I, however, believe that a better comparison of culpability deals with the knowledge of illegal material, and that comparison would be at bookstores. Bookstores can curate the material in their store and are not held liable for their curation. The only time bookstores can be held liable for illegal material in their stores if they have knowledge of the material. Otherwise, if they do not have knowledge of the material, then they are not held liable for the material. Online services differ from this, as they can have knowledge and not be held liable for illegal material on their services. The reason for this is because, ironically, Xeron versus AOL, that established this. If Xeron dies, that opens them up for distributor liability, and then they will have an equivalent liability to a bookstore. That also does open up a can of worms.